After entering the Promised Land, how long was Israel not allowed to eat of the fruit of the trees they planted? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Leviticus on Walking Through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Leviticus chapter 19. We're going to be reading from verses 20 to 25. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Leviticus 19, beginning at verse 20. Whoever lies carnally with a woman who is betrothed to a man as a concubine, and who has not at all been redeemed nor given her freedom, for this there shall be a scourging, but they shall not be put to death, because she was not free. And he shall bring his trespass offering to the Lord to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, a ram as a trespass offering. The priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering before the Lord for his sin which he has committed. And the sin which he has committed shall be forgiven him. When you come into the land and have planted all kinds of trees for food, then you shall count their fruit as uncircumcised. 3 years it shall be as uncircumcised to you. It shall not be eaten. But in the 4th year all its fruit shall be holy, a praise to the Lord. And in the 5th year you may eat its fruit, that it may yield to you its increase. I am the Lord your God. As we said in our last lesson, in this chapter, what we have here are a bunch of laws listed that seemingly have nothing to do with each other. Simply reading these laws separately might make it seem that God had finished giving the majority of the laws that he wanted followed, and now was giving the leftovers, quick little laws about little things pertaining to daily life. But in verse 2 of this chapter, God had Moses tell Israel that you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Now, we often associate holiness with righteousness and sacredness, but the word also carries with it separateness. Holiness is the separation of righteousness from wickedness. Holiness is the separation of sacred from profane. God is completely holy. He is completely separate in all things from his creation. Because God is holy, he wants his children to be holy. If we understand this passage in the light of God's desire for the children of Israel to be holy, now all of a sudden it's not just a list of seemingly disjointed laws, but ways of how the children of Israel will be separate from the nations round about them. Coming now to verse 20, we continue with how Israel would be separate from the nations that surrounded them. Verses 20 to 22 deals with someone who lies carnally with a woman who is betrothed to a man as a concubine and has not been redeemed nor given her freedom. In other words, what we're dealing with is a slave woman who most likely has been betrothed to a slave man, though not necessarily so. In our study of Deuteronomy, we'll see that if this occurred under normal circumstances, in other words, the woman was a free woman, then the penalty would be death for both of them. But since the woman was not free and possibly couldn't even prevent such an action from being committed against her in most cases, there would be a scourging for the one who was at fault, most likely for the man, unless the woman too was active in the seduction. Following the scourging, the man would bring a trespass offering to the Lord, a trespass offering because restitution needed to be made for taking something that didn't belong to him, a betrothed woman. A ram as a trespass offering would be offered to the Lord, and the man would receive the promise of forgiveness that was offered under the law of Moses. We do not read of any money being paid in restitution to the man of the betrothed. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that one wasn't required, but the trespass offering demanded such in chapter 5. However, if this was a special case, due to the fact that that which was taken was a person who was returned, meaning that no monetary penalty was required, we're unsure. Regardless, the priests of God and the people of that time knew what needed to be done, and since we're not under this law today, understanding all of the intricacies of the law is not important. The nations around about Israel wouldn't treat their slave women this way. They would frequently engage in sexual relations with these women, with or without the woman's consent, and no penalty would be exacted. Israel was to be separate. They weren't to engage in such in the first place, but if they did, they had sinned, and as such, penalties and atonement needed to be made. The final set of verses for this lesson are verses 23 to 25. It deals with a situation that would not arise while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, but when they came to the promised land and had settled in it. When they did, some would become farmers and plant vineyards and fruit orchards. When they planted such trees and vines, they weren't allowed to actually eat of the fruit trees until the 5th year. The first 3 years, they would consider the fruit as uncircumcised, not consecrated to the Lord, and none of that fruit would be eaten. In the 4th year, the fruit was to be dedicated to the Lord, meaning that it would be presumably brought to the tabernacle to be used by the priests who ministered to the Lord there. After this, in the 5th year, the people could use the fruits for the general use. All of this makes complete sense to those who farm and to those who understand the law of Moses. For those who farm, you understand that generally the fruit produced by a tree is not generally good to eat in the first few years because the tree is not mature. The fruit will not be large enough or sweet enough, making it not suitable for food. So that God commanded the children of Israel to regard this fruit as uncircumcised was no loss to them. For those who know the law of Moses, you know that God commanded the first fruits to be offered to him. This would not just be the first fruits of each year, but in the case of these fruit trees, the entire first fruits that were allowed to be eaten. Only after dedicating their first fruits to the Lord may the rest of the harvest be used by the people. The nations round about Israel would not generally do this, or if they did, it would be done to a false god. So Israel was to be separate in this practice, holy to God. We'll conclude the chapter, the Lord willing, in the next episode. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Leviticus 19, verses 26 to 37, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.